Good afternoon and welcome. A new strategic equation is taking shape in West Asia. The proposed US Saudi civilian nuclear agreement is being presented as an energy partnership, but many experts believe its implications go far behind electricity generation. Supporters call it a step towards clean energy, technological cooperation, and economic diversification. Critics warn it could reshape regional security, trigger fresh strategic competition, and complicate the already fragile balance between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel. Could this deal redefine the future of nuclear politics in the Middle East? What are the strategic calculations behind Washington's support and Riyadh's ambitions? And where does India stand as a trusted partner to all major stakeholders in the region? Let's begin the discussion with Brigadier Aditya Madan. Sir, thank you very
Yeah.
much for
Thank
joining
you.
the
Thank
show.
you, sir.
Let's begin. Begin with
Yeah.
what has become one of the biggest strategic developments in West Asia. On paper, it's being described as a civilian nuclear agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. But many analysts believe it could alter the strategic balance of the entire region. Why has this deal suddenly become so controversial?
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, Sahil, to you and to all the viewers. So, I think there are two reasons why this agreement has attracted so much of attention. The first is the timing. Personally, I think this deal has come at probably the worst possible time. Now, just look at the sequence of the events. The entire world has spent the last few months discussing Iran's nuclear program, and Washington's message to Tehran has been very clear. You cannot continue enriching uranium indefinitely, and you must place strict limits on your nuclear program. Now, almost immediately after that, the United States starts negotiating a civilian nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia, where Riyadh is asking for something very significant. That is the right to enrich uranium on Saudi soil. Now, this is the crux of the whole issue. Now, if you are sitting in Tehran, you will naturally ask a simple question. If Saudi Arabia can enrich uranium, why can't we? After all, both the countries are signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has always argued that the NPT gives every non nuclear weapon state the right to pursue peaceful nuclear energy, including uranium enrichment, under international safeguards. So, if you see from Tehran's perspective, this looks like Washington is applying one standard to Iran and the another standard to Saudi Arabia. Now, here's another interesting point that often gets missed. Back in 2009, when the United States signed a civilian nuclear agreement with the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi voluntarily agreed not to enrich uranium. That agreement became known as the gold standard because it eliminated one of the most sensitive parts of the nuclear fuel cycle. Saudi Arabia, however, now is seeking much more than that. We must understand this. It wants enrichment capability inside the kingdom. Reports also suggest that Riyadh is reluctant to accept the International Atomic Energy Agency's additional protocol. Now, this is important to understand. This additional protocol allows inspectors to conduct short notice inspections. Naturally, that raises even more questions. So, now, just for a moment, to be fair, Saudi Arabia says this is purely for peaceful purposes. And legally, under the NPT, it does have the right to pursue civilian nuclear energy. But in international politics, perception matters more, Sahil, as much as the legal provisions. Once the country develops enrichment capability, it's no longer just about electricity generation. It also acquires technology that has strategic significance. That is why enrichment has always been the most politically sensitive part of any nuclear program. So, for me, this is not merely an energy agreement. I would call it a geopolitical agreement. It affects the U.S.-Iran relations. I would say, it
Okay, sir.
worsens the Saudi-Iran rivalry. It upsets Israel's security calculation, if you see from the Israel point of view, and perhaps even the credibility of the global non-proliferation regime. And that is why this deal has suddenly become one of the most closely watched developments in West Asia. Back to Sarah.
Right, sir. That's me interesting, sir. Because if Saudi Arabia already has enormous oil reserves, many viewers would ask a very basic question: why does it even need nuclear energy? Why is Riyadh pushing so hard for this agreement?
Yeah, that is actually a very logical question, Sahil. Most people look at Saudi Arabia and think it is sitting on some of the world's largest oil reserves. So, why would it need nuclear power? But Saudi Arabia is not looking at this through today's lens. It is looking 20 or 30 years ahead. And that is why Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, his full name is known as MBS, uh, Vision 2030 comes into the picture. You must be keeping a track. His objective in this vision document is to fundamentally transform the Saudi economy. He doesn't want the kingdom to remain dependent almost entirely on the oil revenues. He wants manufacturing, technology, tourism, logistics, and advanced industries to become major contributors to the economy. Now, here's the irony which our viewers must understand. Saudi Arabia produces huge quantities of oil, but it also burns a significant amount of that oil to generate electricity for domestic consumption. Now, for a moment, look at it from the Riyadh perspective. It that does not make economic sense. Every
Right.
barrel consumed at home is one less barrel available for export. If nuclear power can generate electricity instead, Saudi Arabia can export more crude oil and earn higher revenues. So, economically, the logic is quite straightforward. And he's right in that. But I don't think economics is the whole story. There's also a strategic dimension. Saudi Arabia has watched Iran's nuclear program for years now. In fact, Saudi leaders have publicly stated on more than one occasion that if Iran ever acquires a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia would have little choice but to develop one as well. Now, nobody is saying Saudi Arabia is building a bomb today. That is not the issue. The real issue is whether it should possess the complete nuclear fuel cycle, and this includes the uranium enrichment. This is the most important part because once you have that capability, you have the technological sovereignty. You are no longer permanently dependent on foreign suppliers, and I think that is exactly what Riyadh wants. We must read between the lines. It wants to be seen not merely as an oil exporter, but as a technologically advanced regional power capable of mastering sophisticated industries. There is one more angle here. The United States also benefits. The American nuclear companies, they get business opportunities. Washington strengthens its long-term influence in the Gulf. And importantly, if Saudi Arabia develops its program with American technology, the US remains deeply involved in shaping how that program evolves in the near future. So this is not a one-sided deal, if you really see. Saudi Arabia gains technology and prestige on one side. On the other side, the United States gains strategic influence. That is why both the sides are investing so much political capital in making this agreement happen. Back to Sahib.
So, if Saudi Arabia sees this as an energy and technology partnership, Iran clearly sees it very differently. How do you think Tehran is reading this entire development?
Yeah, I think Iran will look at this through both a political and strategic lens. Politically, if we see, Tehran is almost certain to argue that this exposes an inconsistency in American policy. For years, I told you earlier also that Iran has heard Washington say that uranium enrichment is dangerous because it creates a pathway towards nuclear weapons. And now, suddenly, another country in the same region is being allowed to enrich uranium under that too under a US backed arrangement. So, naturally, Iran says you cannot have two sets of rules. And honestly, Sahil, whether one agrees with Iran or not, you can understand why it is making that argument. But there is another consequence which I think is even more important. This deal could actually harden the Iran's negotiating position in the discussions which are ongoing. Normally,
Right, sir.
diplomacy works when both sides feel they are being treated fairly. And this won't be the case. If Tehran concludes that Washington has already chosen to strengthen Saudi Arabia strategically while simultaneously imposing stricter conditions on Iran, then Iranian negotiators naturally may become much less willing to compromise. In other words, instead of encouraging flexibility, this agreement could strengthen the hardliners inside Iran who have always argued that the United States cannot be trusted. There is also a regional balance to consider. Saudi Arabia and Iran are competitors for influence across the West Asia. They have been on opposite sides in several regional conflicts, which I've read over the last so many years. So, whenever one side acquires a significant strategic capability, even if it is described as civilian, the other side inevitably views it through a security prism. This is important for us to understand, and that is simply how international politics works. Countries don't judge intentions, they judge capabilities. Today, Saudi Arabia says its program is peaceful. Iran may well accept that. I mean, let's consider a scenario. But Tehran also knows the government change, strategic circumstances change, and security calculations also change. So once enrichment technology exists, it inevitably alters the long term strategic equations. This is very important for us to understand in the geopolitics. And I think that is why Iran is likely to become even more determined to defend its own nuclear program rather than scale it back. Ironically, therefore, a deal intended to strengthen America's influence in the Gulf, actually, if you ask me, it may end up making future negotiations with Iran even more difficult. Now
Okay,
you
sir.
see how USA has stopped bombing after 2 weeks of incessant bombing, and now Iran has also stopped the bombing. I mean, things are getting tough by the day. That is one of the biggest strategic contradictions surrounding this agreement. Back to Sahib.
Okay, sir. Sir, you have explained the concerns of both Saudi Arabia and Iran. But let's step back a little. Is this really about one civilian nuclear program, or could this potentially change the entire non proliferation architecture in West Asia?
Yeah, I actually think that is the most important question in this entire discussion. You see, this discussion is not really about Saudi Arabia alone. It's about the precedent this agreement sets. Let's remember one thing. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, it does allow countries to pursue peaceful nuclear energy. So legally, Saudi Arabia is not asking for something that is prohibited. The problem lies somewhere else. The moment you allow domestic uranium enrichment, you are allowing a country to acquire one of the most sensitive technologies in the entire nuclear fuel cycle. Now, Saudi Arabia says, and I have no reason to doubt its present intentions, that it wants enrichment only for civilian reactors. Fair enough, that is okay. But international relations, they don't work only on today's intentions, they work on the future capabilities. This we must understand, Sai. The government change with the time, the security situation will change, the alliances change. No country has the permanent interest, including us. So countries tend to ask a different question. Not what are your intentions today, but what could you do tomorrow with the technology you possess? And that is why uranium enrichment has always been such a sensitive issue. Now, just for a moment, let's carry this argument one step further. Suppose Washington agrees to Saudi Arabia enriching uranium under safeguards. And tomorrow, another Gulf country could ask, why should Saudi Arabia get that right and not us? It's quite a valid question. Maybe the United Arab Emirates says we accepted restrictions, that too voluntarily. I must emphasize this word in 2009, but circumstances have changed now. And tomorrow, another regional country could make a similar demand. So then suddenly you are no longer discussing one nuclear program, you are discussing the entire region where several countries possess enrichment capability. Now, none of them may actually build nuclear weapons. That is also true. But each of them would possess what strategic experts call a latent nuclear capability. In simple terms, for our viewers, they would have much of the technological foundation required to move in that direction if the security environment deteriorated. And that is how actually the arms race, the nuclear arms race, they began. Not because countries wake up one morning wanting bombs, but because every country starts asking one simple question. If my neighbor has that capability, why shouldn't I? And that is precisely if you see what happened between Pakistan and India, or even now Germany and Turkey. They are also trying to acquire in the Europe movement. USA has released its national security doctrine, and is not much supportive enough towards NATO. That is the security dilemma in international politics. So for me, the real debate is not whether Saudi Arabia should have civilian nuclear energy. I don't
Okay.
think anyone
Right.
seriously objects to peaceful nuclear power. The real question is, where do you draw the line between peaceful nuclear technology and technologies that can eventually alter the strategic balance? And that is the debate the world is really having. Back to Sari.
So finally, let me bring India into this discussion. India today enjoys excellent relations with Saudi Arabia, the United States, Israel, and also maintains working ties with Iran. If this agreement eventually goes through, what does it mean for India?
Yeah, I think India's approach will remain what it has been over the last decade, very balanced, very pragmatic, and driven entirely by the national interest. Now, let's look at why this matters to India. First, the Saudi Arabia is one of our most important energy partners. A significant portion of India's crude oil imports they come from the Gulf, and millions of Indians live and work there. A lot of diaspora is there in all the countries, all the six Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and the trade is expanding, investment is increasing. So stability in West Asia is not an just an abstract foreign policy issue for India. It directly affects our economy. You have seen how the LPG price, crisis was there, and how our oil prices have risen, though they are largely in control now. And it affects the energy prices. It affects the shipping through the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea. You have seen now Houthis, getting proactive in the Bab el Mandeb Strait and Red Sea, how the things have become more difficult now, and it even affects the
Right, sir.
livelihood of millions of Indian families. Now, at the same time, India has built an excellent strategic partnership with the United States. So, our defense cooperation has expanded significantly. We also enjoy very close relations with Israel. And despite all these developments, India has consciously kept channels open with Iran because Iran remains important for connectivity, regional stability, and a long term strategic interest. So, if you see, India today is probably one of the few countries that can talk comfortably to almost every major player in West Asia. It is comfortable with Russia, Ukraine, and even the warring nations, USA and Iran, and that is actually a diplomatic advantage. Now, coming specifically to this agreement, India is unlikely to oppose peaceful civilian nuclear cooperation. That I'm very clear. After all, India itself believes countries should have access to the nuclear energy for development, provided it is under credible international safeguards. That is an important clause which should be activated. But India would also be equally concerned if this agreement unintentionally it triggers a regional nuclear competition. That should be a concern to us because once strategic rivalry intensifies in
Right.
the Gulf, the consequences don't remain confined to West Asia. Energy markets would react, shipping costs, insurance premiums would rise, global oil prices become more volatile, and countries like India inevitably feel the impact. So, if you ask me, Sahil, what India's priority is, I would say it is actually quite simple. India's priority is stability, stable Gulf, stable energy supplies, stable sea lanes, and a stable regional relations. Because a stable West Asia is in India's national interest. And maybe, if you permit, I'll just end with one broader observation. Very often, when we hear the word civilian nuclear agreement, we immediately think this is a discussion about electricity generation. I don't think it is. That is important. This is actually a discussion about power, political power,
Right, sir.
strategic influence, the regional balance. The nuclear technology is only one part of the story. The bigger story is about who shapes the future strategic order in West Asia over the next 2 or 3 decades. And that is precisely why this agreement is being watched so closely. And not just in Riyadh, Tehran, or Washington, but in capitals across the world, including New Delhi. Yeah, back to
Right, sir.
Sahil.
So that's a very important point to end on, that this is not merely a civilian nuclear agreement, but a strategic agreement with implications for regional security, nuclear non-proliferation, and the future balance of power in West Asia. Thank you so much for joining us and explaining this complex issue in such a simple and insightful manner. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
The proposed US Saudi nuclear agreement is much more than an energy deal. It raises important questions about regional stability, strategic deterrence, nuclear safeguards, and great power competition in West Asia. How this agreement evolves could shape the security landscape of the region for years to come. Thank you for watching.